I took my mom in when she had nowhere else to go. But instead of being grateful, she started acting like she owned my house. When she crossed the line one too many times, I kicked her out for good. Have you ever done something out of pure love only to have it completely backfire? Well, that's exactly what happened when I decided to take my mom in when she had nowhere else to go. I thought it would be the right thing to do to show compassion and to help her out during a tough time. But little did I know, what I thought was an act of kindness would quickly turn into a nightmare I couldn't escape. When my mom moved in, everything seemed fine at first. She was grateful, and I thought we were finally starting to build a better relationship after years of strained communication. I gave her a place to stay, made sure she felt comfortable, and treated her like family, hoping this would be the fresh start we both needed. But as the days turned into weeks, something started to change. At first, it was small things like rearranging the furniture without asking, or cooking meals in my kitchen without telling me. I brushed it off, thinking she just wanted to feel at home. But soon the behavior escalated. She started making decisions about what I could or couldn't do in my own house. It felt like she was taking over, like she had completely forgotten that it was my space, not hers. The tipping point came when she crossed a line that I couldn't ignore anymore. What did she do? Well, let's just say it was the last straw. I had tried to be patient, to explain how I was feeling, but nothing seemed to change. When she pushed me one too many times, I had to make a choice I never thought I'd make. And that's when everything spiraled out of control. I had to kick my mom out. Yes, I asked her to leave, and it wasn't easy. It was heartbreaking, but it felt like it was the only way for me to protect myself and reclaim my space. But here's the twist. After everything, I couldn't help but wonder, did I do the right thing? Was I being selfish, or was I standing up for my own well-being? Stay tuned to find out how this story unfolds and whether I'll ever be able to forgive her, or myself. To truly understand what led up to that moment, you need to know a bit more about my relationship with my mom. Growing up, things weren't easy. My mom and I had always been distant, and to be honest, it felt like she never really understood me. I was the responsible one, the one who always tried to keep things together, while my siblings seemed to have it easy, doing their own thing without a care in the world. The resentment built up over the years, especially when I was left to manage everything while they got to enjoy their lives. But even with all the hurt and frustration, I never stopped feeling a sense of duty toward her. So when she called me saying she had nowhere else to go, I couldn't just turn her away. Despite everything, there was still a part of me that wanted to fix things, to make up for lost time. I convinced myself that this would be an opportunity for us to finally connect, to build a stronger bond. I believed this act of kindness would be the turning point in our relationship. First, things seemed to go according to plan. She was quiet, kept to herself, and didn't overstep too much. I figured maybe I had misjudged her. But soon I started noticing subtle changes. It began with her trying to reorganize my kitchen, rearranging things in a way that felt more suited to her liking. Then she started asking questions about the bills, questioning why I spent money on certain things, as though she had a right to know everything. It wasn't long before she started making decisions without consulting me. For instance, one afternoon, she invited a friend over without telling me, expecting me to accommodate them as though it were completely normal. I tried to keep my cool, but this behavior started becoming a pattern. She started acting like my house was her house, and I was just a guest in it. I'd never seen this side of her before, and it was starting to get under my skin. The tipping point came one evening when she tried to rearrange the entire living room again, this time while I was still in the middle of a project. When I asked her to stop, she snapped at me, saying that it was her house too, and that I should learn to be more flexible. That's when I realized, this wasn't about just making herself comfortable. This was about control. She was pushing boundaries, testing how far she could go before I'd finally break. And break I did. The more she overstepped, the more I felt like my personal space, my sanity, was being stripped away. But little did I know this was just the beginning. The real confrontation was still to come, and I was about to find out just how far she was willing to push me before things went too far. It wasn't just the small things anymore. It was the way she began to act like she was in charge of my life. The more she overstepped, the more frustrated I became. I tried to have conversations with her, but she always turned them around, making me feel guilty for feeling uncomfortable in my own home. I didn't know how to handle it. There was no winning with her. If I asked her to be more respectful, I was being rude or ungrateful. If I let her do whatever she wanted, it just encouraged her to push even further. One evening, after a long day at work, I came home to find her rearranging the entire guest room again. But this time it was different. She was packing up all my things from the closet, telling me she was going to make it more comfortable for me by turning it into a space for herself. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just a guest in my own home anymore. I was a tenant in my own life. Her actions were sending a clear message. This is my house now and you're just living in it. I tried to stay calm, but the anger bubbled up uncontrollably. Mom, you can't just take over like this. You don't get to make these decisions for me, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Her response, a sharp, well, I'm living here too, aren't I? You should be happy to have me here. The way she said it, so matter-of-factly, made my blood run cold. It was as if she had no understanding of what it meant for me to open up my home to her, how much I had sacrificed just to make room for her. But this wasn't just about her acting entitled in my space. She was also starting to get involved in my personal relationships. One afternoon, I invited a close friend over, someone I'd known for years. We were in the middle of catching up when my mom barged in, making unsolicited comments about my friend, questioning their intentions, and almost making them feel uncomfortable. I had to ask my friend to leave early because of how awkward it had become. I was furious, but I didn't know how to confront her without feeling like I was walking on eggshells. The more I thought about it, the more I realized she wasn't just crossing boundaries with me. She was isolating me. I felt like I was losing myself in the process, and it was all happening so quickly. My patience wore thinner with every passing day, and yet every time I confronted her, it felt like I was the one being unreasonable. It became harder to keep pretending everything was okay. The guilt of considering asking her to leave was gnawing at me, but I couldn't ignore how much damage this was doing to my peace of mind. Still, part of me kept thinking maybe it's just a phase. But deep down I knew it wasn't. Something had to give, and I feared that if I didn't act soon, I'd lose more than just my home. I'd lose myself in the process. And that's when it all came to a head. A situation happened that would make everything unravel. But was I ready for the consequences of taking the final step? The tension was at its breaking point. Every day it felt like a new battle, a new challenge to my boundaries. I was exhausted, physically, emotionally, and mentally. But it wasn't just the constant overstepping that was wearing me down. It was the way my mom had begun to make me question myself. She would twist every conversation, making me feel like I was the one being unreasonable for wanting my own space, my own peace of mind. It got to the point where I couldn't even have a quiet moment to myself anymore. Every time I tried to retreat into my own thoughts, she was there, either asking questions about my plans or making decisions about what we should do next. I couldn't even get a minute to breathe. My friends started noticing that I was distancing myself, not because I wanted to, but because I was starting to feel trapped. I had always prided myself on being strong, but now I was questioning everything I had worked so hard to build. I was losing myself, and it was all happening so slowly that I didn't even realize how much until it was too late. Then one night things escalated in a way I never saw coming. I had planned to spend the evening quietly, catching up on some work in my room. I had just sat down when I heard my mom shouting from the living room. At first, I thought it was just another one of her outbursts, something trivial that I could ignore. But when I went to check on her, I found her standing in the middle of the living room, hands on her hips, looking absolutely livid. She had gone through my personal things. Not just little things. She had gone into my private drawers and started pulling out old letters, journals, things I had kept for years. What is all this junk? She snapped, holding up a box I had never planned to share with anyone. I stood there frozen, unable to comprehend what was happening. She had crossed a line I hadn't even known existed until that moment. Why are you going through my stuff? I finally managed to ask, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and shock. This is my space, and you have no right to invade it like this. She turned to me with a look of disbelief, as though I were the one in the wrong. You're too attached to your things, she said coldly. Maybe if you weren't so selfish, you'd let go of all this nonsense and focus on more important things. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't just about physical boundaries anymore. This was about my sense of self, my dignity. For the first time, I didn't know how to hold it together. My mind raced. Asterisk, was this really happening? Had it come to this point? Asterisk, and in that moment I realized I couldn't do it anymore. The thought of going on like this, of continuing to let her destroy the fragile peace I had left, was unbearable. But what was I supposed to do next? How far was I willing to go to take my life back? I couldn't keep sacrificing myself, but I had no idea what the fallout would be once I finally made a decision. The weight of the choice was heavy, and the consequences of my next move felt too huge to ignore. I took a deep breath, looking at her standing there, waiting for my response. My heart was in my throat. The silence between us was deafening. And then I knew. The decision had been made. But the question now was, could I live with it? As I stood there facing my mom, my mind was racing with all the emotions I had buried for so long. I wanted to stand my ground, to tell her that I couldn't take it anymore. But my hands were shaking, my heart beating like a drum in my chest. And then out of nowhere, just as I was about to speak, the phone rang. I almost didn't want to answer it. At that moment, everything felt like it was on the edge of collapsing. But I reached for it, desperate to distract myself from the tension building in the room. It was my brother. The one who hadn't been around for months. He hadn't said much after Mom moved in, and I had no idea why he was calling now. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "Hey," I said, trying to sound normal despite the chaos going on in my head. His voice was strained, almost urgent. "I just got a call from Dad. He's been having some health problems. He's asking about Mom." I froze. Dad? Health problems? I hadn't heard anything about this. Why hadn't she told me? The silence on the other end of the line stretched on as I processed what he had said. "What do you mean?" I finally managed to ask. My brother sighed. "Mom hasn't been honest with you, has she?" he said, his voice quiet but heavy with meaning. "She's been keeping some things from you. About Dad. About a lot of things." I felt the blood drain from my face. Was this some kind of manipulation? Was she playing us all against each other? Suddenly, everything I had been questioning about her behavior seemed to make sense. And yet, it didn't. I glanced at her, her back still turned to me, as if she hadn't heard a word of the conversation. The way she had been acting, so detached, so controlling. I couldn't ignore it any longer. She wasn't just staying with me because she had nowhere else to go. There was something else, something deeper that I wasn't seeing. Why hadn't she told me about Dad's health issues? Why was she pretending everything was fine when clearly it wasn't? I felt like the ground was shifting beneath me, like I was only seeing a tiny fraction of the bigger picture. There was more to this situation than just her overstepping in my space. Suddenly, I wasn't sure if the real problem was me feeling trapped in my own home, or if it was that I had unknowingly become part of a much larger mess. "Mom," I said, my voice trembling now, "why didn't you tell me about Dad?" She didn't even turn to look at me. The silence that followed was suffocating. My brother was still on the line, waiting for me to react, but I didn't know what to say. Everything I thought I understood about the situation was beginning to unravel. It was in that moment, with the phone still pressed to my ear, that I realized I wasn't just dealing with a battle over space and respect. I was facing something far more complex, something that had been simmering beneath the surface all along. What if everything I had been doing, everything I had sacrificed, was for something I didn't fully understand? What if my mom wasn't just being selfish? What if she was hiding something even darker? The pieces were starting to fit together, but the picture was more distorted than ever. And now I had to decide what to do next. What was my role in all of this? What was really at stake here? Was it my relationship with her? My peace of mind? Or something I wasn't even aware of yet? The questions were overwhelming, but one thing was clear. Everything was about to change, and the fallout could be more than I was prepared to handle. I couldn't hold back anymore. My heart was pounding, and the uncertainty gnawed at me. "Why didn't you tell me about Dad?" I repeated, louder this time, my voice breaking. My mom slowly turned around, her face unreadable. For a long moment, she just stared at me, as if weighing her next words carefully. Then her eyes softened. But there was something behind them that I couldn't quite grasp. A mix of guilt, anger, and fear? "I didn't want to burden you," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want you to think I was manipulating you. But it's been hard." I didn't know who else to turn to. I was taken aback. For the first time, I saw a crack in her tough exterior, a vulnerability that I hadn't known was there. It was almost like she was pleading, not with words but with her eyes. But before I could process what she had said, my brother spoke up from the phone. "She's right," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Dad's health is getting worse, but we didn't want to bring it up to you. Not like this. We were all trying to manage, but it's too much. Mom's been keeping it together longer than anyone realizes. But it's wearing her down." I stood there, stunned, as everything came crashing into place. My mom had been acting out of desperation, not selfishness. She hadn't been trying to take over my life. She was trying to hold everything together when everything was falling apart. My dad's health, her own struggles, the burden of managing it all alone. It was all too much for her. And in some strange way, she had thought that by pushing me, by making me uncomfortable, she would get my attention, maybe force me to understand the gravity of what was happening. I felt my chest tighten as I realized how wrong I had been. For weeks I had been angry, confused, frustrated, thinking she was just being controlling. I hadn't considered the possibility that she was just as broken as I was. But before I could say anything, the unexpected twist came. "There's more you need to know," my brother said, his tone dark. "Mom's not just here because of Dad's health." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" I whispered. There was a long pause and then he spoke again, his voice strained. "Mom. She's in trouble with money. She's been hiding it from us all. I didn't want to tell you because I didn't want to make things worse. But it's bad. She's been borrowing from people she shouldn't have." I was in shock, unable to process what I was hearing. My mom had been hiding something even deeper. Something more than just the stress of Dad's condition. She had been living in a way I couldn't even imagine. I looked at her, my heart sinking as the truth slowly unfolded. This wasn't just about boundaries or respect. It was about survival. And somehow she had thought I could fix it. I took a step back, everything spinning. How was I supposed to handle this? The weight of it all hit me like a ton of bricks. My mom wasn't just overstepping, she was sinking. And I had no idea how to help her out. "Mom," I said slowly, my voice trembling. "Why didn't you tell me?" She looked at me, her eyes welling up, and for the first time in weeks she seemed truly broken. "I was ashamed," she whispered. "I didn't want you to see me like this. I didn't want to admit that I couldn't handle it anymore." In that moment I realized how deep this had all gone. The stakes were higher than I had ever imagined. I wasn't just facing a problem with my mom. It was a complicated web of guilt, fear, and unspoken struggles that had been building up for years. And I had no idea how to fix any of it. The truth was I had been angry for so long, not seeing what was really happening. But now everything was crashing down at once and there was no turning back. I looked at her, my heart torn. "So what now?" I asked, my voice shaking. She didn't answer right away. And in that moment the uncertainty was the hardest part. What was I supposed to do with this new information? Would I be able to forgive her for everything that had happened? Would I even be able to forgive myself for not understanding sooner? The silence between us stretched on, filled with the weight of everything we hadn't said, everything that had been buried for too long. The silence in the room was deafening. I could hear the faint sound of my own breath, heavy with emotion. I stared at my mom, seeing her for the first time in a way I hadn't allowed myself to before. Her tired eyes, the lines of stress etched across her face, the way she was trying so hard to hold it all together. I realized I'd been too focused on my own frustrations, on the way she had overstepped in my life, to truly understand what she was going through. I had spent so much time resenting her, but all along she had been dealing with her own battles in the shadows, and I had no idea. "Mom, I don't know what to say," I began, the words feeling inadequate. "I know, sweetie. I know," she replied softly, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean to push you away. I didn't want you to hate me. I don't know how to handle it all anymore." I walked over to her, unsure of what I was feeling. Anger? Sadness? But most of all, I felt a deep sense of responsibility. The weight of it all hadn't fully hit me until now. How much she had been struggling, how much had been hidden from us. She hadn't wanted to burden me, and yet here I was feeling like the one who had been burdened all along. But the truth was we were both trapped in a cycle of misunderstanding. I didn't know. "I should have listened more," I said quietly, my voice thick with regret. "But you don't have to go through this alone. We'll figure this out. Together." For the first time in a long while she smiled. It wasn't the kind of smile that erased all the pain, but it was a smile of relief, of someone who had finally been seen. It was a moment of unspoken understanding. In the days that followed, things didn't magically fix themselves. The road ahead was still uncertain. My mom and I sat down and had the hard conversations. We talked about Dad, about the financial mess she had gotten herself into, about the guilt she felt for asking me to take her in. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. The more we talked, the more I realized how much I had to learn about empathy, about understanding where someone's coming from, even when it doesn't make sense to you. I didn't kick her out. We found a way to navigate the mess together, slowly but surely. She She started seeing a financial advisor, and we made a plan to help Dad with his health problems. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. I learned that sometimes the hardest part is admitting you don't have all the answers, and that's okay. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time, I felt like we were on the same team. And that in itself was a victory.